the importance of strategy and smart financing in a context where supporting or financing cultural creative industries is not as easy as in context where the impact investment I work in a context where CCIs are either not a priority or the means available are very limited, and how we should navigate through those different reality. I want to draw your attention. We're in UAE, and I am from the MENA region. I'm Tunisian. So just an idea how different is the situation for CCI's condition and resourcing is within the same region. The situation for cultural creative industries in a country like United Arab Emirates, it's different from what's the reality for cultural creative entrepreneurs or actors or artists in Morocco, Tunisia, or Lebanon. And I want you to look with me at this. This slide, those statistics, for me, they reflect two major information towards the financing cultural creative industries in our region, at least. Or that's actually the case for a majority of Global South countries. These are the part of the state budget for cultural creative, let's say for the culture at all. Tunisia is 0.7%, Algeria 0.4%, and United Arab Emirates 2.7%. You can see the difference between these. Also, the fact that the state budget is completely different. So 0.7% from a small budget, it's incomparable with 7.5% from a huge budget in a country like France. So what we need to keep in mind with those statistics, that there is huge disparity, but also they are not easily accessible. So access to data and information about what are the resources being put available to support cultural creative industries has two important impacts on how we smartly finance cultural creative industries. First, if you don't have a clear idea and the clarity, what are the support flows? And I use the word support in its larger sense. I'm not talking about financial support only, because when you operate in the cultural creative industries, you don't only need money. You need more than that. And it depends on your development stage. In your beginning, sometimes when I advise my client, I would tell them, go for technical assistance, go for incubation before you go for a grant or for investment. So it depends where you are. It depends what is the sector you're operating within. And that's where you decide what are the resources. So if you are the responsible of designing the financing or supporting cultural creative industries in your country, how could you have a smart strategy if you are blind about who's funding and who's financing what, where are the gaps? And I use this word, I use the metaphor of, it's like asking a driver not close his eyes and drive. So that's the first impact. We may design inappropriate strategy if we don't really understand how the financial, like the resourcing dynamics are being implemented. The second important information related to the, not really the lack, but let's say the easiness of access of statistics and information about financing and resourcing cultural creative industry in our region. It has a direct impact in investment. It has a direct impact in the business model of cultural creative, whether it is an NGO or a private sector. Direct impact. I want to share with you these statistics about Tunisia. This is a sample of a little study done on cultural creative entrepreneurship in Tunisia. And please hold your thought about this CCI boost. CCI boost, we're going to come back to it later, but you're going to see that it's a fundraising tool. How the link between information and smart financing is visceral. So hold on that CCI boost. I'll talk about you later. That platform helped me help creatives generate statistical information anywhere in the world. So if you look here, when we asked this sample of cultural creative entrepreneurs in Tunisia, how do you finance your project or your entity or your business? And you can look at this. You have 55% of them are relying on self-funding. Very little, 4.8, say they get access to investment / or venture capital. 14% only used loan as a mechanism to resource their project or enterprise. Only 14% have access to funding. So that's the unclarity, let's say, and the lack of information on what you are investing on has direct impact. Nobody wants to invest in something that is opaque, something that is unclear. I understand investors that they could not put their money without knowing how is the size of the market, what are the demands, how many entrepreneurs are there. So, and if you sum up between funding through family and self-funding, 66% of entrepreneurs are relying on self-funding. And that's also tell us a lot about a misperception about the sector. We used to think that culture creative sector people are not enough entrepreneurial. The statistics here says the opposite. 66%, they use their own money, their own saving to go there. And that's, you see, data could be an advocate, could be a way to convince whoever wants to support the sector that we are not that grant-relying people, and we're going to come back to this grant issue later. So this brings us about the discussion, how to do that. I think that I use the word the financial engineering. I mean that when you think about how you support, you have to have like real strategy, how to implement cultural policies without having a smart financial strategy to resource and implement those policies. And the one is depending on the other. However, lately, and for the last period, the majority, but the big part of the advocacy narrative toward funding / investing / resourcing culture creative economy has been dominated by the narrative of having more. But what I'm saying is, I am not sure that's the best strategy. Don't get me wrong, I am not saying that we should not ask for more to support the sector. That's non-negotiable. That is مفروغ منه, like we say in Arabic. But what I'm saying is, maybe we should not put all our effort into that. Meaning, don't forget, I don't think that it's helpful to put such much pressure on Ministry of Culture and saying more money. Do you really think that any minister of the world, whatever it's his portfolio, don't want more budget for his ministry? Everybody wants. But remember, in context where culture creative industries are still misunderstood, are still considered a luxury commodity, they are in competition with other ministry, with other priority, and they have not enough means to fight within that context. So what I'm saying is, maybe it's not either or. It's keep working on advocacy, keep influencing your parliamentary, but in parallel, I think the smart financial strategies for culture creative industries in non-friendly context is to how to get the best out of the little we have until the situation changes. So, and how to get that? First, we should be part of a financial strategy. And I would like to open a little bracket here. In the last 2 days, there were a lot of discussion, and I heard a lot coming that supporting creative cities, supporting development, creative cities development program with team, consultant. So I beg all those who mentioned that they were doing that, please, please, please include in your strategic planning team a resource mobilization expert. Because you cannot have the impact you want if you are using the wrong tool and you are using the wrong mechanism. Because using a wrong tool may prevent you from reaching the target you want. In some cases, even worse, it might do more harm than good. I give you one example. When I think many of artists and creative agree with me here. When you talk about grant making, how you access, and by the way, the grant is just one way to access resource. A grant is the mechanism to channel a financial support. So financial support could be the form of grant, but could be in the form of loan or form of investment. So let's go back to those grants. We all complain about the fact that, yes, you have to twist your creativity to fit into that log frame or budget or indicator. And then that's true. That's true. But the problem is the grant mechanism itself, it's not good or bad. Every support mechanism has its plus and minus. The problem is that it might not be the right tool for you. So what should be there in the ecosystem? That should be different form of channeling support that corresponds to different needs. And to have access to a grant, to be really suffer from the negative side of a grant, you need to have your system ready. You need to have a certain financial maturity, not to fall into what we call in the jargon of resource mobilization expert, it's donor-driven organization. And that requires maybe certain preparation before getting into the grant things. But another example, in countries or in ecosystems, and it's very common in the global south, where most of the financial money, financial support, is channeled through institutional funding or institutional international grant making. The problem is when the money of a grant comes from a public body, so it's taxpayer money, it has a lot of restriction, and that's normal, and that's what should be. The problem is not, no, simplify grants. No, it's create another mechanism, because taxpayer must be, taxpayer money must be, how to say? I get it, okay. Must be, yeah. Taxpayer must be transparent and accountable. So how you do that? How to support this community without having to twist? For example, was I saying, yes, I got the idea now back. How to, if in this context, if you are relying on grants, most of the cases we see that it impacts directly the legal even structure of an organization. To access grant, most of the cases you have to be an NGO. And we see in a lot of contexts that the same organization or the same creative have to have the two legal status, an NGO and an enterprise and production company. What a waste of time and energy. You're managing, you have the burden of management structure onto organization. This is not good. So strategic financial management should be about spending a budget rather than, should not be spending a budget, like maximizing investment. The investment that is being used by a government should be put where it's needed, should be used to create the next generation of investor, investment, and mechanism. And when I advise people when they're doing this, I said, you know what? Current investment should have a seed to create your future investment. Also, smart financial engineering, it should not be only about satisfying a demand. It's not because we want to grant. It's more about nourishing ambitions. I can't see. Again, it should not be the concern of the Ministry of Culture alone, rather all ministries, local authorities, and everybody around. The old approach was more into project-based, more into production-oriented, sector-oriented. This is the wrong way, because it's not sustainable. And also, if you look at it, I really love reading why things are being done in the cultural creative industry through the financial mechanism. This is simply the reality and the reflection in ecosystems where it's completely dominated by institutional funding, because institutional grant making in our sector is more project-based. So that impacts everything. So we cannot choose to work on cinema without, we have to work on the whole system. This is what I advise, for example. In some MENA context, how you do it. In some MENA context countries where most of the fund come from external funding and most from the institutional donor, what happens? The resources that are put available for cultural creative industry actors do not cover the functional cost, do not cover the competition and innovation, meaning that you don't have the basis for your sustainability. What should we do in such contexts as funder, investor, government? We should adapt the gap filling. We should be very smart. Those structural, the foundation that makes you competitive, that makes you innovative, should be funded there where you put, like we say in French, vos billes. Your own B as a government, as a local investor and supporter should be there, because external funder will not look for that. And I'm not giving a judge because it's a whole story behind it. It makes sense that they're not doing that. But this is what we should do when we don't have that much money or support. Extreme vulnerability with the COVID. The COVID brought something, two important things about resourcing of finance and culture creative industries is lack of local shields, lack of local investors and support. And that's the minimum viable requirement for cultural creative industries. I just want to share with you this one. I came up with this idea about these are the minimum viable requirement to have a sustainable and enabling financial ecosystem for cultural creative industries. First is accessibility. Resources must be accessible in two levels. Accessible as information, so people know about them, and mechanisms that are accessible. People can access them. They're not excluding mechanism. The second is the agility. We have to have mechanism systems that are agile, can adapt to shocks, crisis, and respond on the time. The third is diversification. I'm talking about two types of diversification. Diversification of player, because different player has different way to respond to your need. In time of crisis, the institutional player are not the best to become the first part of the response because they are bureaucratic, and it makes sense they are bureaucratic. It's part of the accountability. But they should not be the first responder in crisis. There must be other players, private sector are more agile, then they have to share roles. The sustainability, of course, we have to think about how we sustain the resources we put in place. And the third, of course, is accountability and transparency. This should be done through, and this is a full-time job. This we should have in every ecosystem, someone just doing this, working on advocating, bringing on donor, recruiting others. I'm launching a CFW, the first fundraising for the art certification for the MENA region. At the macro level, I was just very quickly, I'm taking you about what we do as CFW to create this and access to resource. We work on the 4 barriers to access and resources. First is access to information. We have the biggest database and website where you can publish and learn about all kinds of opportunities. So if anybody here has an opportunity for the art, I want to share information, it's for free, just send it to us and look what we have. Capacity building, we need to build the next generation for resource mobilization expert in every ecosystem. The third is access to resources and support, and of course, advocacy. If there are no one bringing in donors or investor in the ecosystem, it won't work. So one last thing, a few things. This is my business model. How I survived with zero help. What I advise my client is say, okay, your strategy in a harsh environment is how to survive, plan for no help. And how you do that, it's being consistent in what you do and diversifying your resources, investing. And the most important way to do it, if I go back to the business model here, consultancy and service is a first phase in your development. I have rarely seen an enterprise in the ICCs and the other, even startup world, that have survived without having at least part of their activity with some consultancy work. So this is one of the major events we are organizing to create a space where cultural creative actor will meet with their supporter and funder. Those kind of spaces are needed. And visibility about education for both sides is needed. So, and I have really a very nice story about this one. We're using, this came like out of nowhere, an opportunity for during the COVID. I was invited as a speaker and I pumped up these platforms called AirMeet. And I just imagine it. How can we create a virtual space and we democratize access to information about resources? So this is a worldwide event, has happened in May. We invited funders, supporters, investors from all over the world to come and tell people what do I support, how to access it, and how, who can apply. And it was really amazing. It was 24-hour nonstop. It's online. It's free. We are now organizing the MENA version for it in partnership with the Arab Foundation Forum and with the small support of the Arab Fund for Culture. So please subscribe and join this event. I invite anyone that have any kind of support for the MENA actor to come. It's for free, and it's to know the community.